Hi guys, Carol here from Child's Play ABA. So today I wanted to talk to you about probably one of the most important skills that we can work on in ABA. It's a foundational skill or a prerequisite skill, one of the really early kind of learning building blocks. So we really want to get that firm and well established within any of the learners we're working with, and that is imitation. So if we think about the way that children learn, we can think about it in kind of a couple of different ways. And one of those is as an experiential learner. So they could like look at an object and kind of try to figure things out themselves. Oh, what is this thing? Maybe I could tap it. Maybe it's a drumstick. Yeah. Oh, maybe I could rub it. Nothing's really happening there. Oh, right. Seems to be a little bit different there. Maybe if I pull, oh, it's open. Okay, right. What's this for? Smells good. Do I think it's for smelling? Maybe. And oh, maybe I could color with it. They kind of get there eventually. So experiential learners have quite a lot of advantages. They're kind of discoverers. They're scientists. They're looking and experiencing their world. They're very present. They may notice things about the objects that we wouldn't actually notice normally. And they might be able to say, oh, well, this is actually a different way that you could use this, and it's a more effective way. So lots of benefits to being an experiential learner in terms of like society as a whole and outside the box thinking and problem solving. One challenge maybe if you relied only on experiential learning is that it takes quite some time. So if we can take the example of the marker, if you had to figure out how to use absolutely every single object that our wonderful human society has come up with just by trial and error, you would take quite some time to learn all of those things. And that's why it's really important to have observational or imitation. So then we can look at somebody who is using something that we've never seen before, and we can kind of figure out that, oh, well, that's how that should be used. Let me give that a try. Kind of further on down the line, then we have verbal instructions as well. So you could just have that there and tell somebody, pick it up, take the white in one hand and the black in the other hand, pull your hands, and then use the pen or marker to write. So we kind of have those three different stages of how to learn. But we're going to focus on why behavior is so important, why imitation behavior is so important. Given how important it is, it's something that we call as well a behavioral cusp, and that means that it can lead to lots of other skills. So by watching how we walk, a baby can then learn how to crawl and then learn how to walk, and walking will lead to lots and lots of different avenues of reinforcement and reward and opportunity for learning more things. That's what we mean when we say it's a behavioral cusp. It's that it opens a lot of doors that we didn't really plan for. Okay, so you're probably very familiar, if you're from an ABA background, with how an imitation program might be run. You might start with object imitation. Do this. Yeah, no problem. You might have a car. Do this. Okay. You might have a doll and say, do this. Okay, the boy drinks from the cup. Oh, wow, great. So you know what an imitation program looks like. That's all well and good. Kind of a couple of things I wanted to highlight as incorporating for your own best practice is to make sure that you're not having your learner rely on memory. Okay, you want them to be actively attending to you, what you're doing with the object, so that it's an interaction and really an imitation rather than, oh, I don't really need to look at her. Oh, she picked up the doll, so I know she's going to feed the doll with the cup. Okay, we want the connection to be there because that's the social interaction and the social imitation aspect of things. So what I would say to you, that's your goal. How do you achieve it? Is to make sure that you have an array of objects out like this so that the child or the learner has to attend to which one is she picking up. Okay, she's going to do this one. Now, as well as that, for every object that you have out in your array, you want to make sure you're doing at least 2 actions. Okay, yes, she picked up the cup, so she's going to give it to the boy. No, not necessarily. She might give it to the boy and she might put the car in it and she might actually bang the drum with it. Okay, so again, we think of the drum. Okay, yes, she might use the drumstick to bang it. She might use her hand to bang it. She might actually shake it. She might put it on top of the boy's head. So you want to have at least 2 actions for every object that you have out in your array. And remember, the size of your array is going to change depending on where your learner is at in terms of their own attending skills. So that's kind of tip number 1 for object imitation or a different ABA programming. Okay, so we usually move on then from an object imitation program onto like a gross motor imitation program. So some children, it might kind of like ease their learning experience if you use objects, and then when they're more comfortable with you, you can remove those kind of helpers and just focus on the relationship between yourselves. Okay, I'm doing this, I'm doing this, I'm doing this. Okay, so again, you're very familiar with GMIs. They've been running 101 different ABA programs. Two kind of areas that I want to focus on there to make your programming really, really excellent. One is that we have something called homologous, and excuse my pronunciation if it's wrong. I did that through experiential learning. I learned how to pronounce it based on how I read it. Nobody told me and I didn't imitate them. Okay, so it might have a homologous. Your learner may benefit from homologous teaching. And that's when both hands are doing the same thing. Okay, versus doing this. And that's actually one that a lot of learners struggle with as well. And that's maybe related more to an OT's point of view, that you have two hands and your brain is controlling what the bilaterals are doing there as well. But it's just something that you can incorporate, trying to make sure if your learner is struggling that both hands are doing the same thing rather than one hand doing something and the other not doing anything, because that can be a little bit harder. So tip number 2 for imitation programming, if you're doing GMI, and your learner is struggling, try to consider or implement some of those homologous activities where both hands are doing the same thing. Another tip or struggle that I see a lot of people running into with the gross motor imitation programs, is that they say, well, what's the instruction that I give? Is it do this or is it clap hands? Okay, so I'm going to keep doing it with the instructions verbally, and I want you to actually close your eyes or look away from the screen. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, or 3, 2, 1, close your eyes, clap hands, tap the table, tap your head. Now, now you can open your eyes again, okay? So even if I wasn't saying the word, or even if you weren't watching me, you, by listening to the verbal instruction, were able to do that, okay? So you weren't watching, but you knew when I said clap hands, that you should clap hands. You knew that I should say tap table, tap table. So even though in a lot of cases we're actually using and trying to incorporate responsivity to multiple cues, in imitation we don't want that. We want the child to be focusing on you as a model, practicing their attending skills and practicing their actual imitation skills rather than following instructions. So that's kind of tip number 3 for imitation programming. Make sure you're using something like a do this. Now, it doesn't have to be do this on repetition, repetition, repetition. It can be, hey, try this, do this, bet you can't touch your nose. I said touch your nose. Bet you can't do this, bet you can't do this. How about this one? Try this. Okay, so mix it up and make it a game. Simon Says that's like part of it. It's not like a really boring, strict APA program. So we're moving from those kind of imitation with objects. We're moving on to gross motor imitation, okay? And from there, you might get things like oral motor imitation, or the child just paying more attention to up here. You might get actual sounds coming out, ready? So when you're doing your PECs and you have generalized imitation, or when you're doing your sign language and you have generalized imitation, the child might actually say cake, or something like that, okay? Then we move on to fine motor imitation as well. And fine motor imitation is that little bit harder and kind of something that we're always working on all the time. So again, I could experiment with this pot. I could try to do all those things to find out how to do it, or I could watch somebody do it. And again, what are they doing with their fingers? Excuse my double joints there. Okay, yeah, that's a fine motor imitation. And then a fine motor imitation again. Look what they did with that pincer grip. So usually with the fine motor imitation programs, it's less practical. It doesn't make sense for you just to start doing kind of do this, do this, do this, do this. There's only so many shapes that your fingers can make, but we want the child to have a lot of practice with fine motor imitations still. So it can be more practical for fine motor imitations to actually use something more that they're going to be using in real life. So something like picking up, threading beads, opening and closing containers. Okay, from those kind of 3 or 4 basic ones, so we have object imitation, gross motor imitation, oral or vocal imitation, and then fine motor imitation. Then you want to move on to sequencing as well. So can you do this, then this, then this, okay? And that'll just help to build up a bigger repertoire in terms of the cognitive or the executive functioning skills in terms of motor plans, okay? So a couple of really nifty tips there. Number 1, have multiple actions related to your objects for object imitation. Number 2, if your learner is struggling with GMIs, try a homologous action. So both hands doing the same thing at the same time instead of just one hand doing it. Number 3, if you are doing the GMI program, make sure you're saying the instruction, do this, not clap hands. so that you're ensuring your learner really is imitating rather than following a verbal instruction. And number four, then when you're doing your fine motor imitations, try to embed them in a practical activity. Don't just have it as random finger movements, okay? Because that's really what we're going to be using them for. Okay, so that's what our talk about is on today for imitation. I hope you guys have a lot of good luck with that program, and see you next time.